And we already know that CSS is responsible for designing or for making visual updates on our website. So we'll be learning how to make those things happen. So this is supposed to be the part one of this tutorial, and the topic that we're going to be looking at today is simple selectors. Simple selectors. What are selectors? Selectors are a way for you to identify an element in an HTML document. Okay, so let's see. We already know that we are in a body element. This is a body element. So let's look at H1 element that says hello world. This is another element which is an H1 element. So we can also have another element here, which is to create an underline. Then we can have a property element that says, or rather a paragraph element. Okay, so this is simple HTML page, and from this HTML page we have several elements here, starting from the HTML tag element. Every tag here, they are all elements. So I define a selector to you as a way to identify an element when dealing with CSS. So the last time we had this session, we talked about how you can represent your CSS, how you can write your CSS code. There are three major ways in which you can write your CSS code. So the first way is through inline, which is what we've been doing all this while for a long time. We've been writing our code inline. What that means is that you write it inside your tag by specifying the style attributes. So this is one way to write that. The second way is through header, through the head. More like using style elements. The first one is using style attribute, the second one is using style element, while the third one is using external file or external CSS document. Okay, so in all this, you end up writing your CSS code. Now, while you are writing your CSS code, you need to identify which elements you want to style, which is very important. Like if you want to make modifications, so you want to beautify this hello world. This hello world is what? This hello world is H1. If you want to identify what H1 is, you need to put it in your CSS code. We are going to be using inline method, or rather we're going to be using style element method. So we're going to explain the number 3 later. We've already been using inline method, which makes it very easy and convenient to just say style color red. It makes it very convenient to make those changes. This is using inline method, but it's not the preferred way to do your CSS, and that's why we're introducing step 2, which is using style elements. So to introduce style elements, it needs to be added inside the head tag. So you have the style there, and how do you then identify which one you want to style? Is by using selector. Hence we come to the explanation of what a selector is. Selector is what identifies the elements in your HTML document. So how do you identify H1? For example, you identify H1 by representing it with the name of the element. So there is what we call element selector. So if you say H1, so let's remove this styling so that we get to see what we have after we finish styling it. So the syntax is by saying the selector. I won't write the details, I'll just write selector. Whatever selector that you have here, Then you have a parenthesis where you can then inside you can then write your CSS property and CSS value. So this is the syntax in which to write your CSS code. CSS property and CSS value. Then you terminate it by what? Using a semicolon. This is a rule, you have to add to make the system understand what you're going to do. We're going to explain what CSS property and CSS value is. So you can add as many CSS property and value as you want, but note the way I've written it. I started with the selector name, the name of the selector, or how you want to select your how you want to query what it is you want to style will be here. Then you follow by parentheses. Then inside will be set of CSS rules, properties and values of what you want to change. So this is the way the syntax looks like. So we're going to make a comment out of this so that we can represent it again when need be. So let's comment this one out so that we can then reuse it in our actual code. Remember what we want to do. We want to set the color to be red. So, and what are we focused on? The selector name. What is the selector name for this element? It is h1, as written there, h1. So this will then be h1. Then parentheses. What's the CSS property to change the color of a font? It's called color. And then what is the CSS value? Of a color. So you just pick the color you want to use. So we can just type in red there. So immediately you do that, we have this, the same effect that we had when we were, doing the inline styling. So, but now we're no more doing inline styling. What this does is that it makes your code neater, makes your code neat. So let's delete all we have here. It makes your code neat, clean, and allow you to focus on other things. So with this, you can have complex design and not worry about overlapping styles. And you can even define more complex style by using this method. So let's go ahead and style other things. So how do you then style P? So how do you style this paragraph here? You want to make this, let's say you want to make this bold. You want to make this bold, or you want to style it. You don't want to, want it like this. So how do you style it? The same way. What is the name of the selector for this paragraph? Is P, as written in the HTML tag here. Is P. Then you have your P. The next thing that follows is your parentheses. Then your CSS property and value can then flow right in here. So we can decide to let's do the background. Let's change the background, or let's do let's increase the font size. Font size 20px. Let's have let's add border to it. 1px, gray, and let's do dashed. So 20, this is supposed to be 20px. So this is what you have. That's what this does for you. Ability to do this feature. So what I've just demonstrated to you is using selector by the name, using the name to identify the selector. So let's go a step further by looking at other forms of selector that we have. How can you select other elements? What method can you use to select other elements in the system? So let's go ahead and try other selectors. So we have other selectors. Let me put it down here. So the selector that we just used, so I'll say selector by HTML element, by element name. That's what we just demonstrated now. The next one I want to show you now is selector by ID. Then after we'll do selector by class. So by class is more easier to explain, then we'll go by ID. Okay, let's move on. Let's add more font to this page that we have here. So let's design something a little bit robust so that we can play around with the styling. So let's do a form. Let's do an admission form. So you should know how to do the form by now. We have so let's do our admission form H1. So let's do login details. So that one is easier. Login. So let's do our username, impute. Password. Okay, so the purpose of this is to style this heavily, and as I style, I will do the explanation. I will use what we have here to explain. So we've already showed you how to style by using the element name. The next thing I want to provide here is to create a kind of block, so that this item can be broken down in easier form to consume instead of inline. So I will use a label. Label is a block element. We'll explain block and inline elements as we move on. So I have this here. Okay, so I'm having this view. Okay, I'm having this view. Label looks like an inline. I think label is an inline element. So a block element will actually show on the next line. So an inline element will just flow. It won't break what is happening. Okay, so what I want to show here is for us to be able to create a kind of login form, a kind of login, so that we can see how to achieve that with the CSS that we have here. We'll still use our label to create. We'll use our label to create a kind of block. What we have here, I don't want to use break to do that. So I want to use the fact that we can now write CSS. So I will use the word label. And in this case, I would then say, what do I want my label to do? I want it to break by default. So we'll start this showing you, I'll start introducing CSS properties and explaining them. We'll have a lot of time to talk about each of them later on, but just follow through, because what we're trying to explain here is type of selector. So don't worry about the CSS property and the value I'm using for now. I'm just trying to explain the CSS selector that we have. So I mentioned that we have two kind of display. We have inline and block. So right now, and we have other ones, but these are just the major ones. So right now, I've used block to make sure that what we have here is in this form. The next thing I want to do is I want to put a space in between these two. I can do that by specifying So margin, you already know margin and padding already. So I'm focused on the bottom, margin bottom. Then I can say 20px and check it out. Do okay. The margin is not applying. So let's check what is going on. Most of the time, when I need to check what's happening to my styling, I use something like this. And that way, I get to know how the label is being applied across board. So you can see that the label is applying to the margin bottom is applying to the bottom of everything. So it means something is wrong with either my CSS or the label itself is broken. So I told the label that it should block at the bottom 40. However, it's not doing that, it's just doing at the last one. So something is wrong somewhere. So you can see that we didn't have a proper closed label. That's where the issue is. Our label was not properly closed, and so therefore our style sheet had problem interpreting what was happening here. And that's, when we talk about HTML. So if you've learned your HTML very well, you should be able to catch this error. So first thing is we didn't close this label here. So I'm gonna close it properly by doing so. So this will close the label and I should have it broken down this way. Okay, so let's go back to what we're doing. Then I can remove this border. The idea of me putting that border is for me to see what's happening, and why was it not done properly. Okay, so the next thing we'll be able to do is we are still using name, element name to style. The next thing I want to be able to do is to carry, okay, let's just go and start doing by class. Let's style by class. So what I want to do is I want to put a small note under here. I want to see what I want to use to style by class. Okay, let's use the button. Yes, let's use button. So after we have this, I can do this and provide my button. Again, we have several buttons, so I'm going to be using input as my button. Submit. So I have my button down there. So I want to specify that class is a way to give a CSS reference to an element. So you want to reference a group of elements. You can use class to actually call them a specific name, so that when you are coding your styling, you can then reference them by the word class in what you've done here. So if I say this is a button now, or let me say sub button, you can call it any name. So this is a made-up name that you call it. You can call it, can be anything. So this class is what you will now use here instead of using input, because if you use input, what will happen? So let's say you want input font to be 40px. So I just want to show you the reason why we are using class, or what class is used for. So when you say input font size is equal to 40, what then happens? Anything that is input will be moved to 40, but that's not our intention. You only want to style the submit input. So the way to do that is to provide this here. The way to do is to provide class and to make it have what you need. Okay, so we go here and you do so as I've said, you put dot this sub button. This sub button can be anything. This is what we decided to put here, and that's why we're using sub button. That's submit button. So if you go in here, notice the syntax is different. We now have a dot is to reference that it's a class. That's what the dot does. The dot makes sure that it's a class, and then the name that you call the class we follow through. So once we save, you will notice that this is the only thing that's now font of 40. So we can then style our submit properly now. So we're not having a design reference, but let's just try and build something interesting. So I will do background. Let's do background color. Let's do this. Let's do border from px solid grain. Then let's do padding 10px. Then remember what we did, the left and right. So I'm gonna do a shortcut now. We're gonna explain this shortcut later. 20px. Shortcut will be explained later. 5. Okay, better. So we have our submit button. We can change the value. We can change the value to a login. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue what we're trying to do. Now, because we have this, we need to also style this so that it will look nice. We can style it. I think the distance from here to here is too much. We can reduce that to, let's say 15. Notice we've introduced by class. We now have by class. This is how to specify a specific class. And the reason why you use class is because you want to differentiate it from other input elements. Or you can always, have specific class alone, irrespective of the fact that it's with an object or not. You can just use it, as it is. So let's move on to the by ID. So ID attribute in an input element is a way to uniquely identify an element. So this element, for as it is now, this input, as far as the system is concerned, is not different from this input. There's no way to identify it uniquely. The only way to identify it uniquely is by specifying the ID. And most of the time, what makes use of this ID is JavaScript. Of course, CSS also use the ID. So let's call this PWD. You can call the ID anything you like, just the same way we were able to name the class, with whatever name we want. The same thing applies with the ID. So we can come and name this one ID and give it we can give it username. I will do UN. Okay, let's do uname as the username. Now we now have the ID. How do you reference by ID? You reference by class by using dots. ID, you use hash sign, and then you follow with the name. So we want to identify your name, and so anything you style here will affect whatever the ID that holds your name. You can only have one ID, one particular ID in the entire document. So let's style this. What style do you want to give to this? Most of the time you style all your inputs that receives any HTML form that receive inputs, in terms of text, are normally styled the same. So we're going to style them the same. But before we do that, I'm going to style this and I will show you how we can apply the rest of the styling. So first of all, let's do, I think it's too tight. So let's add padding to it. Padding, let me do 4px, and it looks okay. So I think that is okay. And you want to make it to look like this as well. So how do you style? Let's now style password. separate as well. So password is styled this way, and we have this. So now we have styled password and name the same way. Now the next thing I want to explain to you is how to combine selectors together. What do I mean by that? So you have a selector that has the same you have a CSS rule. This is a CSS rule that have the same rule as other selector. So because this is a rule, this is a class, this is an ID, this is an ID. These guys are similar. They're even having the same thing. How do you then combine them together so that you don't waste space or you don't waste your time managing it? Because maybe when you make changes here, you want it to happen here at the same time. How do you combine this? You combine it by implementing a comma here. You just come here and you do comma. So what that means is that you are combining this and this together to get this. And this can apply to everything. So you can combine this with this. You can combine, but of course it won't make sense combining the color of the H1 with this. Or if you need to combine things together, this is how to combine it. So the pretty has formatted it for us, uname, comma, pw, like that, and then we'll have what we'll have here. So you can continue styling. You can have your color to be blue, so that when people type in, they'll have a blue color. So if you want to do different color for password, so this is very important. Now what I want to show you is very important. So we've been able to achieve this. Let's say you have another, just for the sake of demonstration, let's have email. And I'll call this ID email. Yes. So we'll have this. Note that the email is not styled because of course the system does not know. By default it will carry its default styling. So you have to consciously style everything, or else you want to style inputs directly, so that you style all inputs. Remember this already, you can style all inputs, but here we are being specific on what we want to style. So we are styling username and password together. So you can also go ahead and style our email that we just created. So that way it's all blue like this. So what I want to show you is a way to, even though we have generalize our styling, I want to pick one out. Like I want password to be red. I don't want it to be blue. So I can still maintain everything that we're seeing here, but I want to come down and say, let me bring out the password alone and make the color blue or red. It doesn't affect all the things you've done here. As at this point, when the browser reads it here, it will accept blue. But when it comes down, it will override password with red. So let's give it a try. You can see password is red. The reason why we left this password here is because we still want the padding to be 4, but we want to exempt the coloring out. So let me show you how this will be naturally. Normally you won't have ID like this. Naturally, this is what you end up having, where you have classes, and this class name will be input form or something, input form input, or text input. Let's say text input, because you want this like literally a text input. So you want all your text input to be in which form? If we save this now, you want all your text inputs. Notice the class is dots for text inputs. So you want all your text inputs to look this way. This is the ideal thing. So you can see the way the system has matched all these three to be one class. All these three now, you now combine it like this. ID, as I mentioned to you, is for uniquely identifying an element, in the system. So that's what that one does. Okay, so let's move on. So I want to make some little adjustment to this password. So again, if password needs to be separate, you can then if you come here again and add a name, let's say ID, right? And then you now remember we have it called PWD. We have it like this. Notice now we have both text, both class and password together. There's nothing wrong. This is very fine. This is okay. So now we are building up complexity into the system. So this means that everything carries text input should be padding 4 and blue. That's fine. What we want to do now is that we want to isolate password to be red. We want to make password to be red. How do we achieve that? We come here and we do what? How do you specify ID? You use a pound sign, then you do PWD. You can then do your color red. So that's what we have there. So what we've been able to achieve, these three things. Select by element, select by class, select by ID. We still have more. I will take questions if you have before we move on to the next one.
Yes.
Okay. Where? In which part? Class and ID.
Use the dots and the hash.
Okay, so
I would like to ask, after the class, if you can give us like the class work, give us like something to design similar to this.
okay, so the assignment will just be what you've been designing now. But instead of using it inline, you will then use style elements. All the example you've done so far, go back, revisit them, and instead of doing inline, you use style attribute. So use style elements to achieve them. That's what we will do. But I will also I'll bring an example and I'll work on that for you guys. However, let me try and explain the question that you asked now. So label is not, all this here, they are not CSS. This is just HTML, right? And the only thing I just introduced were what? Class and ID. I introduced class and ID. So I'll start with number 1, which is selector by class by element name. Element name is just the name of the element. This is label, this is input, this is they're just name, this is HR, this is form, is all written there. That's selecting the element by the name, and that's how we're able to make H1 red by saying H1 color red. That's how we're able to do it. Label, the reason why label is here is because we want to make label break like this. So this is HTML label, and what we are doing is that we are styling. Again, if you don't understand a particular property, don't worry about it. Like this display, now this is the first time I'm using display, so ignore this. Focus. You already know most of these things I'm showing you.